Hello viewers and welcome to yet another Warhammer 40,000 Conquest commentated octagon match featuring Brain Damaged playing as Packmaster Kith up against George Tinkham playing as the Swarmlord. For the very first action of the game, we end up seeing a copy of Siren Zithlex played out to planet number 1, and this is actually going to be the very first game I've played where both players' hands are visible. In taking a look at our planet layout, planet number 1 is going to be Yavvarn, which puts units into play. Planet 2 is going to be Barlas, which allows you to discard cards at random from the opponent's hand. Planet 3 is Eloith, which tutors the top 3 cards of your deck. 4 is Planum, which allows you to move units from planet to planet, which is going to be very important, seeing as how Siren Zithlex happens to be sitting on the board. Planet number 5 is Karnath, which allows you to trigger the battle ability of any other planet in play. The initiative token is currently in the hands of our Dark Eldar player, and our Tyranids Warlord playing player happens to put out a copy of the Scything Hormagaunts at planet number 2. Our Packmaster Kith player, Brain Damaged, ends up opposing that Scything Hormagaunts with an equivalent number of command icons in a Kith's Chimera Masters, and in taking a look at our Dark Eldar player's hand, we can see that even though he's already whittling away his resources, he has a copy of Clavex Warleader, he has a promotion, and then he has quite a bit of shield cards. He has Shadowfield, which could potentially prevent our Tyranid player from dealing out any damage to one of his units, so long as that Tyranid player doesn't put out more than 2 cost units. We've got the Agonizer of Bryn, that signature attachment, which is likely to be used as shields, and then of course a raid to steal resources. Our Tyranid player ends up putting out another copy of Scything Hormagaunts to planet number 3, and that's going to be 2 infestation tokens already, although we've yet to actually see those tokens put out onto the board. We see a copy of Promotion put out to the Kith's Chimera Masters at planet number 2, which is going to allow Packmaster Kith to win command at that planet, and it seems as though we could potentially see a victory condition for either player as early as the planet 4 Planum, and of course any battle won at Planum if that were to shift Packmaster Kith from planet 1 to any other planet. For instance, if Kith were to go from planet 1 to planet 3, that could set Kith up extraordinarily favorably to win very early on, just in really punishing our Tyranid players' deployments. In taking a look at George Tinkham's hand, he still happens to have a Toxic Venomthrope. He's got quite a few units that are very friendly to those Termagant tokens likely to be produced by the Swarmlord. He has a Swarm Guard, which is going to make them more survivable, and he has an Adamant Hive Guard, which is going to protect Hive Mind Specialization units or Termagant tokens like that Swarm Guard or any of the HP buffed tokens. And to no one's surprise, we see George put out a copy of the Toxic Venomthrope to planet number 4. So the command phase is looking to be relatively equal between players. I can't really see Packmaster Kith going to planet number 1, considering that George's Synapse unit happens to be the Stalking Lictor. I don't see him sending that to planet number 1. The Swarmlord normally doesn't like to go to planet number 1 or 5, wanting to derive the utmost effect from its ability, so I can only imagine that the Swarmlord is likely to go to planet number 2, therefore Kith might end up going to planet number 2, just anticipating the Swarmlord trying to trump that Chimera Masters with the promotion, but we'll end up seeing what is ultimately chosen here. It looks like both players have chosen where exactly they'd like to commit their warlords. Kith, indeed, ends up at planet number 2. The Swarmlord also goes to planet number 2, exactly as I predicted. And the Stalking Lictor wisely goes to planet number 5 in order to snipe command from that planet. So it seems as though we're going to be just seeing a tremendous number of infestation tokens out on the board already, because as soon as this Toxic Venomthrope ends up winning command, that'll be 3 planets infested. we end up seeing Termagant tokens generated at planet number 1 and 3, and in regard to income, we see George Tinkham, our Swarmlord player, end up pulling in 4 cards and 2 resources, and it seems as though his cards aren't tremendously useful going into the combat phase here. So he got his signature attachment, the Bone Sabers. He ended up getting a copy of Regeneration, and then a couple of army units that cannot be used as shields. Packmaster Kith alternatively only managed to win 2 cards in 1 resource, and those are both army units, so they'll be nice to see for the following round's command phase, this Void Pirate, and definitely Bloodied Reavers is going to be handy. Although he won't have the initiative token going into the next turn, he can still potentially put this out at, say, Eloith in order to attack for potentially 4 once he has the initiative token. We see combat occur. The initiative token happens to be in the hands of Packmaster Kith, and of course Siren Zithlex manages to just destroy that opposing Termagant token with absolutely trivial difficulty. In regard to actually triggering Yvarn, I cannot see Kith choosing to trigger that planet. He certainly has that copy of Klavex Warleader, but that's not going to really be something he'd want to put into play. He could do something along the lines of Bloodied Reavers, but definitely a wise move not to trigger that effect based on what's in the Swarmlord's hand. Planet number 2 is going to see a battle, and this is looking pretty daunting for our Tyranid player. He happens to possess a copy of No Mercy, but there's a lot of damage that needs to be dished out before that's going to be any use at all. Our opening attack happens to be a Chimera taking a swing at the Swarmlord, and all of these shield cards in the Tyranid player's hand happen to be pretty high value. We see George's very first combat action actually being to retreat with his Swarmlord. I certainly can't blame him for not wanting to get rid of his signature attachment or regeneration or myriad other staples. And then, much to the Swarmlord's chagrin, a Chimera token very handily mops up at that planet by swinging for 2 and destroying the Scything Hormigaunt. And of course, now that there's been a battle won at Barlas by a non-Tyranid player, that's going to be a random card discarded from George's hand, and additionally, it's going to be that Infestation token cleared. So George ends up losing a copy of his Virulent Spore Sacs, probably not the most useful card, but seeing as how there's plentiful Chimera tokens already starting to accumulate on the board, that could be pretty handy. Taking a look at what our Dark Eldar player drew, we ended up seeing a second copy of Siren Zithlex, currently sitting in the headquarters, and the new unique from the Great Devourer, Solarite Avetus, which is just absolutely fantastic when it comes to destroying Termagant tokens. The initiative token happens to be in the possession of the Swarmlord at the present moment, and we see 6 resources and 8 cards in total. We've got a Clogged with Corpses, but no supports to destroy with it. We've got Adamant Hive Guard and I guess 1 at the moment Termagant token to protect with that, and we see a Swarm Guard, but at the moment things are just looking a little bit tricky for the Tyranid player. He doesn't have anything apart from this Swarm Guard that happens to possess command icons with which to put out and try to establish himself, and if our Dark Eldar player can manage to build up some sort of choke, that's going to be absolutely nasty. Bone Sabers we see put onto the Swarmlord. The Swarmlord's already wounded, but he now possesses the initiative token. As soon as he destroys an army unit, he'll generate a Termagant. Somewhat surprising to me, perhaps, is that we see a copy of Solarite Avetus put out to Barlas. I suppose I could have seen this maybe more sensically going to planet number 3 or planet number 4, just so that Chris, brain damaged, can try to win through those blue technology icons, but perhaps he really wants to keep, pressing that random card discard, wants to keep depriving our Tyranid player of cards, and of course, taking a look at Kith's hands, as soon as he manages to pass 3 resources going into combat, it doesn't matter how big something is that the Swarmlord plays, because he'll be able to destroy it with this Klavex Warleader. And if at any point, as soon as he happens to have fewer resources than George, he could play out that raid, so plenty of different options for him. At the present moment, it seems as though Chris, our Packmaster Kith player, happens to be bemoaning the fact that he forgot to destroy this infestation present at the planets, and at present we're waiting on the action of George. Alright, it looks as though George has decided to put out his copy of the Swarm Guard, likely just wanting to try to win some command with this unit, unless the Swarmlord happens to deposit a Termagant token at planet number 4, he's unlikely to actually benefit from that Hive Mind effect, and just taking a look at George's hand, he's kind of in between a rock and a hard place in regard to what exactly to do, and to make matters still worse, our Dark Eldar player does end up putting out that copy of Bloodied Reavers. It doesn't quite trump the command of this Toxic Venom Thrope, it doesn't even break even, but it certainly sets him up potentially favorably to deal out some significant damage to the Swarmlord, so long as he can manage to use some of those shield cards in his hand to stave off some of that damage. We end up seeing Kith play a copy of Raid in order to steal a resource from George, and now we happen to have Kith at 2 resources and George back down to 1 resource. And it seems as though George has passed at this point. We end up seeing Kith put out a copy of Void Pirates, and now, rather effectively, Kith has been able to kind of steal a ton of just command victories from our Tyranid player. I think it would certainly make sense for George to potentially send the Swarmlord to planet number 3. Planet number 1 is at present enormously well protected. We ended up seeing a copy of the Agonizer of Bren put out attached to Solarite Avedis, which is going to make that flying unit incredibly nasty. There are only 2 Chimera in play at the moment, but as soon as Kith happens to generate an additional Chimera, the Solarite is attacking for 5, and as soon as a non-flying unit happens to damage it, that unit takes 2 damage in return. So that would kill a Scything Hormigaunt, it would kill a Termagant token, any number of different effects. We end up seeing Aatrox Prime at the moment, and that's definitely going to be a little bit frightening, so I could definitely see Packmaster Kith sending herself to planet number 5 just to prevent the Swarmlord from doing the same, because the Swarmlord definitely wants to destroy Kith's tokens. I suppose it all ultimately comes down to Kith is sent to planet number 3, and the Swarmlord goes to planet number 4. So a Termagant token is going to appear at planet number 3 and at planet number 5. The Swarmlord's going to be able to trigger any battle ability of its choice, and it looks as though Kith is going to be winning the first planet entirely uncontested, and the Swarmlord is going to be winning the 5th. In regard to command, it's not looking great for our Tyranid player, but he does manage to win a total of 2 different planets, and in fact, it seems as though both players actually strike even, so 3 cards, 1 resource for each. And just taking a look at what our Tyranid player pulled in, we've got another copy of No Mercy, which is going to be great considering that unique Stalking Lictor, a Scything Hormagaunts that infest planets, and a Brood Warriors, which is going to be incredibly important just because command is something our Tyranid is currently really struggling with. We end up seeing a Chaos Fanatics, a second Clavex War Leader, and an Incubus Warrior for our Dark Eldar player. Granted, he only happens to have 1 resources relative to our Tyranid players 2, but if at any point the Tyranid player puts out something big and nasty, if he saves up resources, that Clavex War Leader is going to be a fantastic answer to that, because we see very, very few shield cards indeed in the hands of our Tyranid player. It looks as though Packmaster Kith did end up winning the first planet, and I think much to George's frustration, he ends up losing randomly his second copy of the Virulent Spore Sacs, which is going to deprive him of a fantastic opportunity to try to kill off these Chimera tokens in mass, and Solarite Avedis, even though it's in the HQ, currently has 5 attack, and that's not looking to be reduced anytime soon. We are going to be seeing a battle take place at Planum, and as soon as this Toxic Venom Thrope is killed off, this Infestation token is going to be gone, and then that's going to allow our Dark Eldar player to move any unit he would like to whatever planet he would like. I can only imagine that it's going to be Siren Zithlex, perhaps moving to Elowith, just to make sure that that battle can be won without heavy Tyranid and reinforcements there. But the Toxic Venomthrope is destroyed, and things are not looking fantastic for our Tyranid. The battle ability, I am predicting we'll see Siren shift to our soon-to-be planet number 1. But what ultimately are we going to see? We end up seeing Solarite Avedis shifted to our soon-to-be planet number 2, and very important to note, this is actually going to be the victory condition for Chris, so he must be much more concerned about Planum than Elowith, and I suppose for Packmaster Kith's sake, let's just hope that the Tyranid player isn't able to really heavily reinforce this planet. I suppose if he were to reinforce Elowith, Packmaster Kith could still win at our soon-to-be planet number 3, Karnath. There is going to be a battle taking place there. That copy of Void Pirate sitting there at that planet is absolutely obliterated. And in regard to triggering a battle ability, what exactly is George going to trigger? Aatrox Prime would be fantastic to potentially kill off all the different units in Kith's headquarters, and he does end up managing to destroy 2 Chimera tokens. Kith takes 1 point of damage, and then what exactly are we going to see regarding shields for the Chimera Masters? My bad, it seems as though Kith's Chimera Masters had indeed already taken a point of damage in checking our chat log there, and at present both Warlords and our Synapse unit have bounced back to the HQ. Taking a look at our Tyranid player, he still has no victory condition anytime soon, no planet icons amassed quite yet, so in order to stave off a victory at the hands of Packmaster Kith, he'll definitely have to block at Planum, he'll have to additionally block at Taurus in regard to blue icons, and I'm just kind of curious to see how exactly these combats play out. It seems as though Planum is going to be the only planet that Packmaster Kith still needs to win. I must have somehow gotten confused regarding my planet type icons. We end up seeing a copy of Chaos Fanatics played by Packmaster Kith put out at planet number 3, and we also see a Termagant Sentry put to planet number 4. So Kith bests command at planet number 3, and Kith still manages to best command at planet number 4, but of course our Tyranid player does happen to have a handy copy of Promotion sitting there in his hand. At present, George does happen to play that copy of Promotion, and he's still got 5 resources remaining, whereas Packmaster Kith presently uses his last resource in order to put a rogue trader out to planet number 5, which happens to be Taurus. So at the present moment, it looks like there's just a tremendous number of units in play. By the time a battle actually took place at Taurus, I can scarcely begin to predict which player would happen to have more units. In regard to battles that are going to be taking place, the initiative token is currently in our Kith player's hand. It's looking as though this first planet is going to be successfully captured by our Tyranid player, but because I happened to overlook those strong point icons earlier, it's all but certain that Planum is looking enormously well defended. In regard to our Tyranid player's hand, we aren't seeing anything tremendously daunting in his possession. He still happens to have the initiative. It's his deploy action, but the Adamant Hive Guard aren't really doing him much good. These Brood Warriors could potentially help him win command at a planet, because the Swarmlord can go to one planet, and then he could potentially put out the Brood Warriors to, say, Karnath, and then the Swarmlord would deposit a token there. The token would gain 1 command icon. He could put out the Scything Hormagaunts somewhere, but at the moment, based on what he's possessing, the Adamant Hive Guard are so expensive relative to how much damage they're doing, and the same can be said with the Scything Hormagaunts and the Brood Warriors. It just very much looks like this is a complete nightmare of Dark Eldar units sitting here at Planum just blocking any hope that the Swarmlord has of victory, and even though he could potentially deal out some serious damage with his Warlord, Kith happens to have the initiative token, and there are just so many units here at Planum. Every time Solarite of Vetus takes damage, it deals out 2 damage, and even though we only have 1 Chimera token in play, as soon as Kith spawns another, it itself is attacking for 4. It has the flying keyword. It's just incredibly nasty, especially when you stop to consider just how many shields our Dark Eldar player happens to have. And even though Brain Damage doesn't have any resources, he's got an Archon's Terror, so as soon as he generates 2, he can essentially just banish whatever non-unique unit he wants. So it seems as though both of our players are in the process of choosing where exactly they're intending to send their Warlords for command. Packmaster Kith could do something a little bit gutsy, like going for planet number 1 or planet number 4, potentially Aatrox Prime, just trying to win command there. I can't really see Kith envisioning it being necessary to go to planet number 2. The Tyranid Warlord ends up going to Karnath, and that's going to allow him, presuming the Swarmlord handily wins that battle, to trigger potentially Aatrox Prime, potentially Taurus, lots of different awesome effects, and Kith ends up being ever so slightly gutsy and going to planet number 1, so our Dark Eldar player's actually not going to do anywhere near as well as I was anticipating in regard to command, only a grand total of 2 planets, and it seems as though our struggling Tyranid, even though he's not dealing a lot of damage out during the combat phase, he's nevertheless setting himself up very well in an economic sense, but it's all just going to come down to, is he going to have any hope at all of attempting to best this just formidable and daunting Dark Eldar combat presence? Alright, after a little bit of a pause, it seems as though George is back. He triggers the Swarmlord's reaction in order to generate a couple Termagant tokens at planet number 2 and planet number 4, and then in regard to command, we end up seeing our Packmaster Kith player end up reeling in a total of 3 cards and 1 resource, which means that he's only got 1 resource. It's not enough for Archon's Terror. It does happen to be enough to play Raid, and then he could play an Archon's Terror if he'd like. He also got a copy of Warp Storm, which is going to be extremely useful, as well as an Archon's Palace, which would have been much better earlier in the game. Our Tyranid player ends up reeling in 3 cards and 3 resources, and once again, much to his, I'm sure, frustration, he doesn't see anything that's terribly useful in a combat sense. He sees another copy of Regeneration, he sees another copy of Clogged with Corpses. There are no supports to destroy, there are no formidable units with which to affix these awesome attachments. Certainly they're handy, but there's not really anything in our Tyranid player's hand giving him any hope of trying to win at our Packmaster Kith player's victory condition planets, and now battle is going to erupt at planet number 1. It's a Scything Hormigaunt and a Termagant token versus Packmaster Kith, a Kith's Chimera Masters, and a Chimera token. Our Packmaster Kith player could, if he wanted to, raid in order to Archon's Terror something. Next round, he'll happen to have a Warp Storm ready. There's just all kinds of nasty stuff, but we do see a Chimera token destroy that Termagant token. The Scything Hormigaunt happens to have its attack potentially negated by a discarded copy of Shadowfield, but we see the Stalking Lictor exhaust to help fund a No Mercy so that the Scything Hormigaunt's attack goes through and ends up dealing out 2 points of damage to Packmaster Kith. But at the present moment, that's not really the most useful thing to see. We do end up seeing that copy of Raid played by Packmaster Kith, and are we going to end up seeing an Archon's Terror? I can't imagine that we will. Seeing as how Kith will get to attack, then we'll have a new combat round start if the Tyranid doesn't retreat. Packmaster Kith does take a swing. We've certainly got a glut of shield cards, 1 value shield cards in our Tyranid player's hand, but he simply allows the Scything Hormigaunt to die. He doesn't does not bother retreating, and that's going to allow Kith to trigger this battle ability to trigger the top 3 cards of his deck in order to pick one of those, whatever he would like, to add to his hand. It's a little unfortunate that I don't think I'm going to get to see the cards that Kith actually is assessing, but we'll definitely get to figure out exactly what of those 3 he ends up determining. We are going to see a battle at Karnath as well, and it's going to be absolutely trivial for these Chaos Fanatics to just be obliterated. The Swarmlord is going to be able to attack for 3, then the Swarm Guard will attack for 1. I can't imagine Kith is going to waste valuable shields in trying to save this Chaos Fanatics, and the card from the top 3 that Kith ended up picking was Suffering, which is going to be absolutely fantastic in making sure all of these units survive. Solarite Avedis, so long as it keeps taking damage, if you can shield it to the point where it only takes a single point of damage, that's just going to be so monumentally frustrating. And seeing as how Kith was not bloodied, the Solarite is going to be attacking for 5 right off the bat, which is enough to outright bloody the Swarmlord, so things are looking very, very grim for our Tyranid player. The Swarmlord does manage to take a swing and handily destroy that Chaos Fanatics, and of course that's going to allow him to generate a Termagant token. It's not going to be terribly useful, but by winning this battle ability he could either move a unit or, probably much more wisely, opt to trigger Aatrox Prime in order to blast Kith's HQ once again. Actually, it looks like Taurus is going to be activated, so I can only imagine that our Tyranid holding 7 resources is going to draw 3 cards, just in hoping and praying that he maybe ends up getting something more useful, something along the lines of a Shrieking Harpy, perhaps. And it looks as though our Packmaster Kith player was assuming that Aatrox Prime, much like I did, was actually going to be triggered, so a very small error there. And just in regard to what our Tyranid player ends up pulling in, it looks like a copy of Brood Warriors, which is okay, it's not tremendously useful. A 3rd copy of the extremely just entirely useless Clogged with Corpses, and then his 3rd and final copy of Virulent Spore Sacs, which is actually incredibly nice to see at this point, because it's going to be able to detonate at this planet and potentially kill off any Chimera sitting there. It's going to nearly destroy the Bloodied Reavers, it's going to wound Solarite Avedis, just all of these different things. Of course, the huge problem now is, as a new round is about to start, any units deployed by our Tyranid player to Planum are going to arrive exhausted because of Siren Zithlex here, so we'll have to see what exactly our Tyranid player draws. Each player gets 4 resources and 2 cards. A Termagant Horde ends up being drawn, which is certainly nice for the Swarmlord. It's going to be generating a Termagant token at the beginning of every combat round, so it's going to be a very high priority target. Of course, we don't happen to see a Strangler Brood or anything like that. That would be very nice to see, but we can certainly see a copy of Regeneration put onto the Termagant Horde. The only problem is that they're only attacking for 2, and even though George happens to have 11 resources, 15 cards, he doesn't have a lot of 2 or more shield value cards. He doesn't have a lot of affordable combat units. And then, of course, taking a look at what Packmaster Kith drew, we've got a copy of Slith Mercenaries, which could be fantastic in potentially trying to win command from our Tyranid player, but seeing as how there's such a huge resource discrepancy, 6 versus 11, I can't really see that being the case. And even if we do see a copy of that Termagant Horde, which is currently being played to planet number 1, I can only assume we'll see a regeneration put out onto it. Klavex Warleader is going to be an incredibly convenient answer to that, as is Archon's Terror. So that is just going to be enormously frustrating. And of course, if things somehow got completely out of hand, which there's no way that they can, this Warp Storm would be absolutely fantastic. Kith would take a bunch of damage, granted, but if you could ensure that you win command at that planet, that's going to be the game. So it's all likely to come down to Planum here. It seems as though our Packmaster Kith player has perhaps already passed, which is a little bit of a surprise, but he's probably wanting to ensure that he'll have as many resources as possible to potentially put out both copies of Tyranids Warlord during combat, and now it's all up to Grendel. It's all up to George, it's all up to the Swarmlord. We do see a copy of Adamant Hive Guard put out to planet number 1, and we see that Virulent Spore Sacs also put out to planet number 1, so it'll be able to sacrifice itself despite being exhausted, but I can't really imagine that's going to be enough. I could definitely see Packmaster Kith going to planet number 1. I suppose I could see Packmaster Kith going to a different planet just to ensure that there's multiple Chimera tokens alive so that Solarite of Vetus is hitting as hard as possible. We do see a copy of Regeneration put out onto the Adamant Hive Guard, and considering that, you know, Packmaster Kith has all of those resources, those Tyranids Warleaders are going to be doing so much work, it just seems entirely unnecessary to send Kith to that planet, so we might see her sent anywhere just in order to prevent our Tyranid from drawing some cards. So maybe Aatrox Prime, maybe Karnath, any number of different places would be great, just because the Solarite isn't going anywhere. As soon as some of these squishier attackers deal out a little bit of damage, those Tyranids Warleaders can ensure that combat goes favorably for Kith, and at the present moment, it's just kind of how exactly does our Tyranid player want to dig himself a grave. He could potentially draw something incredible during command, but Dark Cunning is really the only thing I can think of that might be of any use to get in an extra attack, but with those war leaders, things are just looking incredibly bad. I can only assume we'll see both Tyranid Warlord and Synapse Unit go to planet number 1 to try to win that combat, if at all possible, but things are looking pretty grim. So I suppose let's see. The Stalking Lictor could also maybe go to planet number 5 just to block 2 resources and 1 card being generated by Kith. But what exactly are we going to see? Kith needs 2 resources to make George's life a living nightmare. Alright, so both of our players have selected where exactly they'd like to commit their warlords. We end up seeing Packmaster Kith go to planet number 3, so it seems as though she's wanting to spare those Chimera tokens, she's wanting to prevent our Tyranid player from winning command, and we do see the Synapse unit go to planet, I suppose, number 4, not planet number 5, our final planet. And of course, the Swarmlord does go to planet number 1. He's going to generate a Termagant token at planet 2. That's not really going to do anything. Kith is going to end up winning command at only a single planet. So much to Kith's frustration, he's going to be 1 resource shy of being able to play out both copies of Tyranids Warleader, but he certainly can do an Archon's Terror plus a Warleader, and our Swarmlord has a hell of a lot of exhausted units sitting at planet number 1. Our Tyranid ends up winning 3 cards and 3 resources. He's got an Indescribable Horror, which can rout an army unit, whether it's unique or not, equal to the number of Tyranids at that planet. The Swarmlord currently has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Tyranids sitting at the planet, so George could easily rout Solarite of Vetus. He's got 3 resources. He definitely can do it. It seems as though we're being very carefully with actions here. George indicates he's going to destroy his Virulent Spore Sacs to deal out 1 damage to each unit, and then I can only imagine we'll see a copy of Indescribable Horror. Packmaster Kith assigns 1 damage to each of her units, and I suppose let's take a look. We'll see if that Chimera token ends up being saved. We do see a copy of Suffering discarded in order to preserve its life, which is going to be very wise, considering we're going to need as much damage put out as possible by our Packmaster Kith for her to actually end up winning this planet. Certainly Archon's Terror is going to be very convenient. Tyranids Warleader is probably going to end up making all the difference here. But the Swarmlord is going to get to attack. The Swarmlord could potentially continually generate additional tokens, and if Solarite Avedis ends up being routed, that's going to be a very nasty blow dealt out to our Dark Eldar player. But of course, since we've seen one action played out by our Tyranid, it's going to be up to our Dark Eldar player to now take an action, and this Archon's Terror could completely ruin our Tyranid player's hands. So I suppose let's see what happens here. I'm very curious as to whether the eagerness to put out a point of damage onto Solarite Avedis could potentially have cost George this planet and potentially the game, just in case we do see the Kith player's turn to take an action, be that Archon's Terror, which drops the Tyranid player's unit total so low that Indescribable Horror can no longer target Solarite Avedis. Something likely working against our Packmaster Kith player at the moment is based upon the forgetting to remove that infestation token earlier. He's probably not quite as familiar with the Swarmlord's signature units as he might be. Alright, so it seems as though I made a small mistake, and I need not have been so concerned about that indescribable horror, because as soon as the combat phase starts, George had an opportunity to destroy the virulent spore sacks, deal out that damage, and then once a combat round begins, now we see the Termagant Horde end up generating a token, which is going to bring the total number of Tyranid units present at the planet to 5. So it's entirely possible that our Tyranid player might ultimately end up winning this one. So the Termagant token takes a swing for 1, and we end up seeing a copy of Warpstorm discarded as shields, and we see a No Mercy played, so that shield icon is essentially negated, and the Bloodied Reavers is outright destroyed, and now it's just Solarite Avedis and a Chimera token and Siren Zithlex, so maybe we won't even see that indescribable horror used, and if George can keep on winning planets, then he could potentially come back and win this game. We do end up seeing an indescribable horror, which is going to, I suppose it's very sound judgment here, banish Solarite Avedis. It's going to be routed, so despite its enormous attack value of 5, despite that nasty reaction and everything else, the flying, it's going to be routed and dealt with. And now it's going to be Packmaster Kith's opportunity to attack in return, and now things start to look a little bit more dangerous. Certainly Packmaster Kith does still have 7 resources. He's got an Archon's Terror, he's got the Clavex Warleader. There are plenty of targets that are just, ripe to end up being destroyed. But the longer this Termagant Horde sits in play, the more tokens it's going to put out. So even though the Hive Guard has 2 attacks, 7 hit points, this Termagant Horde might end up being a much more necessary thing to destroy. But perhaps Brain Damage disagrees. We see his Chimera take a swing at the Adamant Hive Guard, and maybe he's going to try to kill that Termagant Horde through more conventional means, or maybe he's going to try to just bloody the Swarmlord. I'm curious as to how exactly things are going to go. But we do see the Chimera token attack, and of course, since the action window happens to be in the hands of the initiative token possessing player, we see regeneration triggered immediately in order to wipe away that 2 points of damage prior to any opportunity to ambush the Clavex Warleader into play. The Swarmlord takes a swing at Siren Zithlex for 3. We see a copy of Suffering discarded in order to negate 2 out of that 3 damage, and now once again it's Kith's opportunity. There are no damaged Tyranid units. So the Siren does end up taking 1 point of damage, but what exactly is she going to hit? I can only imagine she'll hit the Adamant Hive Guard, and then that'll be a fantastic opportunity to put into play this Clavex Warleader that could also hit the Swarmlord. It's not going to be able to kill the Swarmlord, but it's a fantastic opportunity to deal out some additional damage. Kith does hit that Hive Guard, so I can only imagine that we will see a Clavex. And I suppose let's see it. We see 1 point of damage to the Adamant Hive Guard, 2 points of damage to the Adamant Hive Guard, And now, does either player have an action? We see the Termagant token controlled by our Tyranid player attack the Chimera token, and Kith, in regard to shields, just happens to have an Archon's Terror. We do see that Chimera token destroyed, and that's essentially going to bring us to the end of the combat round, unless we happen to see any actions. Is that Clavex Warleader going to destroy the Adamant Hive Guard? Is it potentially going to survive? It looks as though George has passed, or indicated that he's passing, and we do happen to see a Clavex Warleader, so the Adamant Hive Guard is going to be outright obliterated, and it's now our Packmaster Kith controlling player's opportunity to attack. Again, we're not going to be seeing a double Clavex Warleader. This Termagant Horde is going to be immensely frustrating. It's got 5 hit points. It can regenerate 2 damage once per round, but what exactly is the Clavex going to attack? I can only imagine that we'll see the Swarmlord being attacked, but as soon as the Swarmlord kills something with an attack, it will generate a Termagant token. So we do see a Clogged with Corpses discarded. The Swarmlord is only going to take 2 points of damage from the Clavex Warleader, and that's going to bring us to the bottom of the combat round. I suppose we could see an Archon's Terror banish this Termagant Horde, but in assessing the combat math, I can't really see it working out favorably for our Packmaster Kith player. The initiative token is going to be in the hands of the Swarmlord, and Kith just doesn't have the shield icons available to make this work. Plenty of shields in the hands of the Tyranid, and as that Termagant Horde generates an additional token, it's just looking incredibly bad now for Kith. So whether or not George is going to be able to win this planet, win Karnath, win Aatrox Prime, he could very well potentially come through and win this, but at the moment, Packmaster Kith only has to win an additional blue or green planet icon in order to win this game. It seems as though George is once again back from a brief AFK, and his first action is going to be using his initiative in order to expend a combat turn in order to retreat with the Swarmlord. And now it's going to be our Eldar player's opportunity to attack. I suppose George is fairly comfortable in knowing that with 3 resources, our Packmaster Kith controlling player certainly isn't going to be putting out any additional Clavex Warleaders, but I wonder if he realizes that an Archon's Terror is going to be able to make potentially very handy work of this Termagant Horde, and now it's all going to come down to this Siren Zithlex here. Siren Zithlex is being attacked by a Termagant token, and the only shield card that Chris happens to have in his hand is that Archon's Terror, so if Kith is destroyed, then that only leaves him with a Clavex Warleader to try and kill all of these different tokens. And I suppose in just thinking about the math, like let's say Zithlex is destroyed, the Horde is Archon's Terrored, the Clavex destroys a ready Termagant, all units ready, a Termagant attacks, 1 damage on the Warleader, it destroys the other token. It seems as though this could potentially cost the game to go to Packmaster Kith. So Siren Zithlex is destroyed. Are we going to see that Archon's Terror? This could potentially do it for him. I'm sure he's probably doing the mental math I just did at the present moment. And Chris happens to ask, is there any action? George indicates that there is not. Taking a look at his hand, we do see that Archon's Terror. It's going to banish the Termagant Horde, and that means that all he has to do is chew through these 3 different Termagant tokens. And that, yeah, we see George call out fudge, and that retreat of the Swarmlord not only cost him an attack, but it means he's potentially, he could have killed a Clavex Warleader in a single swing, and I think it's all going to come down to this one critical mistake on the part of our Tyranid player. In taking a look at his hand, he's got a No Mercy, but that's not going to do anything without any uniques to exhaust. We see another Termagant token destroyed. Our Clavex Warleader is going to take a point of damage, but it's not going to be enough. This Clavex Warleader is going to have a single point of damage when it all comes down to winning the game here, so our Dark Eldar player is completely out of shields, but of course we're going to see that ready Termagant destroyed. Or actually, maybe I spoke too soon. Because as combat starts, this Klavex Warleader is going to end up being destroyed. I guess I must have done my mathematics wrong, because that Klavex Warleader is now gone, and the battle ability ends up being won by our Tyranid player. So, my sincerest apologies for that mistake there on my part, viewers. So it looks as if the battle at Planum is going to be won by the Tyranid player, and it's all just going to come down to being incredibly close. But Planum is won by our Tyranid, and now he's going to be able to strategically relocate any of his units that he'd like. I can only imagine it's going to be this Termagant horde to somewhere, but he's going to have to definitely block Karnath. He's going to have to block Aatrox Prime, and if Kith manages to win Aatrox Prime, that could be just a huge bombardment to any planet. So I'm very curious to see what exactly George is going to decide here. Okay, so it looks as if he does end up choosing to shift his Termagant horde to our soon-to-be planet number 1, just trying to block off Kith's victory condition under any and all circumstances possible. And at the present moment, even though our Tyranid player doesn't have any big, daunting, powerful combat units, he's digged through his deck. He's drawn through 28 different cards at the moment. He's got a volatile Pyrovore. All of a sudden, Siren Zithlex is destroyed, and even though our Packmaster Kith happens to possess another copy in his hand, certainly resources are starting to become a big problem for our Tyranid. And as soon as, just look at how many Termagant tokens are out here on the board. Things are starting to look very bad for Kith, in that she's just, I think, likely not going to be able to generate enough resources to put out the cards necessary to try and win the game back from the Swarmlord. So we'll have to see if our Tyranid ends up just achieving critical mass. And considering that these Brood Warriors are still sitting out in play, if our Tyranid can just start robbing command from Kith, then that's going to be immensely frustrating. But a battle does break out at Aatrox Prime. We see a Termagant Sentry destroyed, and then we end up seeing a copy of... it looks as though that Termagant token ended up taking a swing at something, Packmaster Kith, it would seem, and then a Chimera token is going to respond by trying to destroy this Termagant, and that's very frustrating because with Packmaster Kith so close to being bloodied, even though she's still going to be generating Termagant tokens, when it all comes down to that big decisive battle, even a single point of damage is going to banish Kith away from that planet, and it's going to be Kith winning at Aatrox Prime. Certainly Aatrox Prime can blast Karnath. It can blast the HQ of the Tyranid player. So we end up seeing that Termagant token destroyed, and the Swarmlord takes a single point of damage. So both Warlords are only at a single hit point at this point. They both now return to command. They both now return to the HQ. The Stalking Lictor is about to return to the HQ, and it's all going to come down to these next couple planets. So if our Tyranid player ends up winning, he's going to have to try to win Karnath. He's going to have to try to win Aatrox Prime, and then if he wins Taurus, that's going to be... It's gonna be close no matter what, but both players end up getting 4 resources and 2 cards. We see a copy of Archon's Terror and Kith's Chimera Masters for our Dark Eldar players, so many additional Chimera. That Solarite Avedis is just going to be so incredibly formidable, but there's just so many bodies that our Tyranid player is going to be able to put into play, and it looks as though Kith is probably going to try and do the long game here and just fortify Aatrox Prime as much as possible. But what's going to be frustrating for Kith is that if she gives up Karnath, Aatrox Prime is going to be able to... Well, I suppose it'll be able to fire at adjacent planets or an HQ, so just by merit of defending Aatrox Prime, Kith is going to be immune from harassment from it, and is just going to be able to absolutely devastate our Tyranid players' headquarters. So, for all I know, Kith might end up being able to just block off Aatrox Prime and win the game through that. Otherwise, our Tyranid player is going to have to deploy exhausted units to Aatrox Prime, but then those could be easily killed off. In this big decisive battle, at least the initiative token is going to be in the Swarmlord's hand, but seeing as how the Swarmlord is just so close to being bloodied, that's just immensely frustrating. So I could see the Swarmlord letting itself be bloodied just so it can sit there at the most decisive battle, potentially attacking for 3 multiple times. It's just going to be, it's all going to come down to being extraordinarily close. But we see our Tyranid player put out a copy of Brood Warriors to Karnath, and through merit of those 2 Termagant tokens being there, that's a grand total of 3 command icons placed at that planet. I'm not exactly sure what his thought process is by putting the Brood Warriors there. It's going to be yet another unit clogging up his HQ, soon to be bombarded by Aatrox Prime, but it's now Packmaster Kith's turn. 2 resources, definitely not likely to be winning a lot of command. Packmaster Kith just isn't going to be able to reel in very many resources, but what exactly can our Tyranid do to try to win himself the game? We end up seeing a copy of Kith's Chimera Masters put out to planet number 3 just to try to, I suppose, win as many cards and resources as possible, because for all these daunting units that Kith has, there definitely aren't very many shields in his hand, and wanting to get some benefit from this rogue trader is going to be absolutely crucial in getting as many resources, hopefully 6, for the final combat of the game, just because Archon's Terror plus Klavex Warleader is going to make a huge difference. I can only imagine that Kith is going to be going to planet number 2. It's our Tyranid player's turn to deploy. The Synapse unit, I would imagine, will be going to Taurus. Maybe the Swarmlord will also be going to Taurus, but is he going to try and win command at Taurus? Is he going to try to kill off some of these units? I think he might allow the Swarmlord to be bloodied, but I'm just not sure. We end up seeing a copy of the Brood Warriors played out to planet number 3, so I suppose it would make sense if the Swarmlord ends up going there just to try to win command by any means possible, or by sending the Synapse unit, the Stalking Lictor there, he manages to actually win command relative to our Dark Eldar player, which would block off a total of 2 resources and 1 card. So I will assume that the Swarmlord is going to go to Karnath, just to ensure that that planet ends up 1, and the Stalking Lictor to planet number 3, whereas Kith will be going to planet number 2. I believe that at this point both of our players are going to be passing. They've yet to actually state it, but there's really nothing left for them to play, save for this copy of Promotion for George, but I imagine he'll probably save it as shields. And both players have passed at this point, so for committing Warlords and Synapse units, I'll say Stalking Lictor Planet 3, Kith Planet 2, Swarmlord Planet 1. It seems as though George has actually changed his mind, and he is going to be putting a copy of Promotion out onto that Brood Warriors, so I suppose that means he'll no longer be sending his Synapse unit to that planet. So I'm curious as to where exactly he might be going. Is he going to be so bold as to try to win Aatrox Prime in a strictly command sense? Is he going to be so bold as to try to win Aatrox Prime in a strictly command sense? Of course, we end up seeing Kith sent to planet number 2. Absolutely no surprise there. Solarite Vetus is going to be set up very well for the following turn, and I suppose the Stalking Lictor ends up going to planet number 1 along with the Swarmlord, so it's essentially pointless for the Swarmlord to use its ability to generate a token at Aatrox Prime, but it's going to be 2 planets 1 for our Tyranid player and 1 planet 1 for Packmaster Kith. So comparing players, we've got Chris. Packmaster Kith generates 1 card, 1 resource, and he's currently sitting at 1 resource, 6 cards. So during this following turn, it looks like he'll get 4 resources during headquarters, he'll get an additional resource during the following turn's command, and that'll put him at the 6 necessary for Clavex plus Archon's Terror. And then Grendel, George, is going to end up winning 2 cards and 2 resources. He gets a Leviathan Hive ship, which isn't tremendously useful based on what all he has in his hand, and of course a copy of Toxic Venomthrope, which is once again not very useful. So I'm sure he'd have much rather seen any kind of event or attachment, anything with shields, maybe some sort of, an additional copy of Volatile Pyrovore would have been absolutely fantastic. So the first planet is going to be 1, and I suppose our Tyranid is actually going to trigger Taurus in order to draw 3 additional cards. He ends up winning a Strangler Brood, a Brood Warriors, and a Heavy Venom Cannon. So important to keep in mind is he doesn't actually have any elite army units. It is a 2 shield value card, but he's not going to be able to actually put that onto an elite to deal out an area effect 2 volley, and considering he's still got 3 resources in hand, even if he's going to generate 4 resources during the headquarters phase, 7 is not going to be enough. It's going to be 1 shy of playing any Tyranid Elite plus the Heavy Venom Cannon, and that could have made all the difference in the world at Aatrox Prime, but he's just not going to be able to do it. So maybe he's going to be able to play out some ridiculous amount of attacking units. Aatrox Prime is definitely about to be a bloodbath, but our Tyranid player's HQ is just frankly about to get devastated. So I suppose let's see what exactly is going to happen. Aatrox Prime is going to fire off into this HQ. What exactly is our Tyranid player going to see? He's got, in regard to shields, he's got 3 copies of Clogged with, 2 copies of Clogged with Corpses, but he's got a grand total of 4 1 shield value cards, and he's got a 2 shield value card, so no actions at Aatrox Prime. It's going to be 1, entirely uncontested. Let's see those shield cards. There are so many different targets to be struck by that effect. It looks as though the Swarm Guard takes a point of damage, the Termagant Horde takes a point of damage that'll be healed away, the Brood Warriors and Stalking Lictor end up taking damage, and what are we going to see regarding these Termagant tokens? Is he going to use a bunch of shields just to save them, just to try to get off as many attacks as possible? Just because each token, it could kill an Incubus Warrior, it could kill Chimera tokens. There's a lot of work that they could do, so I can only imagine that they're going to be just trying to clog the table here with bodies, and we do end up seeing 4 different shield cards played out. So for some reason, he chose to use the Heavy Venom Cannon as opposed to No Mercy, so I suppose he's going to be saving that to try to make all the difference, perhaps to bloody Kith, and even though our Tyranids are just completely ravaged, we'll have to see if George can try to win it. It's all going to come down to Aatrox Prime here. Whichever player wins Aatrox Prime is going to end up netting that blue technology icon that it's going to be required to win the game with. We're going to see our headquarters phase, which will mean 4 resources and 2 cards for both of our players. I'm very curious to see what exactly they're going to get. Any unit deployed to planet number 1 is going to be just not exactly useless, but it's going to arrive exhausted. Our Tyranid player did catch a little bit of a lucky break in netting his 2nd copy of Indescribable Horror, which is going to allow him to once again rout the useless but incredibly dangerous Solarite Avedis. So that's just going to be incredibly nasty, but our Packmaster Kith controlling player is going to be able to generate all the resources he needs in winning command at this planet to put out a Clavex War Leader. He ended up drawing an Archon's Terror, which is going to be great for shields, if nothing else. and it's just going to all come down to this planet. So entering our final deploy phase, the initiative token happens to be in the hands of our Tyranid player. What exactly are we going to see? We end up seeing the very first deploy action for our Tyranid player, of course, being a copy of Ripper Swarm put out to play at planet number 1. It's 0 cost, it's limited, but it is an attacker. It does happen to arrive exhausted, but each and every body that our Tyranid player can put onto the battlefield is going to be absolutely integral. This volatile Pyrovore is going to be incredibly important just in making sure that it can potentially not just kill one of these Dark Eldar units, but in being destroyed by an attack, in all likelihood react by destroying a one of these units. What's going to be immensely frustrating is all of these Termagant tokens present at planet number 1 are going to happen to have 3 hit points. So whether or not we see the Clavex Warleader destroy the Swarm Guard, whether or not we see the Archon's Terror banish the Termagant Horde, I'm just I guess very curious to see what exactly happens. I can only imagine that at the onset of the combat round, we'll probably see Archon's Terror banish this Termagant Horde just to make sure that it doesn't actually generate a Termagant token that will likely have an attack value of 2, presuming we see this Strangler Brood interplay, and then maybe the Clavex Warleader will be saved to destroy this Swarm Guard. So definitely a lot of nasty stuff from Kith. This is very much an uphill battle for our Tyranid player, and to no one's surprise, of course, we do see Chris, we see Packmaster Kith pass, wanting to preserve as many resources as possible. And that's got to be a dead giveaway to our Tyranid player to expect another copy of Clavex or another 2 Archon's Terror, any number of different terrible effects, but it's all up to George. I can only imagine we'll see Volatile Pyrovore, we'll probably see this Indescribable Horror, and we'll see a copy of Strangler Brood, and that's going to give him maybe just a handful of resources to fool around with, and at the moment, I'm sure he's probably running through the math of just trying to figure out he can, I suppose at this point, rely on one additional resource token from Taurus, seeing as how Kith has passed, unless Kith happens to go to a different planet. But we see a second copy of the Swarm Guard played out to Aatrox Prime, and that is immediately going to make life much more difficult for our Eldar player. So maybe I ended up speaking too soon. This is just an incredibly close, incredibly tense match. So we're going to see a Swarm Guard, we're going to see a Volatile Pyrovore, we've got 1 resource left, so are we going to see a Strangler Brood, or are we just going to see, I can only imagine we'll see this Indescribable Horror played, presuming our Tyranid player does net 1 resource from Taurus here. Both players are picking where exactly to send their Warlord. I can only imagine that both Warlords and Synapse will go to planet number 1, but what exactly are we going to see? Both players have chosen. Let's see those dials. We see planet number 1 for Kith, so she does not have initiative. She's certain to be bloodied very quickly. The Swarmlord goes to planet number 1, and for some reason the Stalking Lictor goes to planet number 2. That's a little bit surprising, but I imagine it's just to ensure that No Mercy is going to go off, potentially to kill this Solarite of Vetus, and that means each player is going to win one of these planets. They're each going to get 1 resource, 1 card, so we're going to be able to see an Archon's Terror, plus a Clavex Warleader for our Dark Eldar player, and we're also going to be able to see an Indescribable Horror played out by our Tyranid player, as well as a No Mercy, but the initiative token is in the hands of the Swarmlord. I can only imagine that the Swarmlord is going to be attacking first. Is he going to take a swing at Solarite of Vetus? Is he going to be taking a swing at Siren Zithlex and then using the No Mercy to ensure that that's killed and that the Solarite gets routed? There's a number of different effects here, but it's actually really looking pretty good at the moment for our Tyranid player. There are a lot of different Chimera, but between the Termagant Horde, between the Swarm Guard, that is just an incredibly nasty combination of effects. So maybe George is going to do this, but let's see how combat breaks down. We end up seeing a Termagant token generated by the Termagant Horde, so I suppose we weren't going to be seeing a copy of Archon's Terror used against that Horde. I suppose we're therefore going to see the Swarm Guard being routed, and another copy of the Swarm Guard being potentially outright destroyed, whether it's through attacks, whether it's through whatever it is, but this is going to be very close, this final battle, so we've got a hell of a lot of exhausted Tyranids, we have a hell of a lot of ready Dark Eldar units. We, in regard to shields, don't have much for our Tyranid players, so what exactly are we going to see? There's plenty of opportunities for actions, there are plenty of opportunities for attacks, so combat is going to be beginning at Aatrox Prime. There are no actions at the hands of George, there are no actions at the hands of Chris. The very first attack is the Swarmlord, I'm predicting, versus Siren Zithlex. We do end up seeing it attack Siren Zithlex. Are we going to see a shield card played out by our Dark Eldar player? He's got a copy of Archon's Terror that's not terribly useful. That No Mercy is going to essentially negate whatever shield icon he chooses to play, whether it's now or whether it's later. We do end up seeing that copy of Archon's Terror used, and now, yes, we see the Stalking Lictor exhaust, and we do see a copy of No Mercy, so Siren Zithlex is going to be handily destroyed, but now, you know, there's still plenty for our Dark Eldar player to do to try to punish our Tyranid player. We see yet another 1 attack, 5 hit point Termagant token interplay, and now we see Indescribable Horror is going to banish Solarite Avedis. That must be immensely frustrating for Packmaster Kith, but she's going to be routed immediately. Absolutely nothing that the Dark Eldar player can do against that, and now it's just looking like a large number of frail little tokens are sitting at this planet up against these 1/5 Termagant tokens, so incredibly nasty, but we see Solarite Avedis exhausted and routed, and that has got to be enormously frustrating. Only 12 cards left in George's deck, but he's definitely at this point seen both copies of his signature event, and whether we see more events, whether we see more actions, or we finally start seeing our Dark Eldar player attack, at this point, only 2 Termagant tokens are left unexhausted, and there's still a ton of Dark Eldar units to start dealing out damage. So we end up seeing a copy of Archon's Terror that's going to be banishing one of these copies of Swarm Guard. Interesting, I suppose, that he didn't choose to get rid of a Termagant Horde, but I can only imagine that the Clavex Warleader is going to be used to destroy that Horde, and then killing off the other Swarm Guard through conventional means. But let's take a look. So Archon's Terror is played. George indicates no actions. What is Chris going to do? We do see a copy of Clavex Warleader. I can only imagine it's going to destroy this Termagant Horde. He ends up targeting the Swarm Guard. I don't think that is the wisest choice, just because that Termagant Horde is going to be an enormous thorn in his side. It has less attack. Well, actually, it has equivalent attack, plus it has that copy of Regeneration that's an action attached to it, so it would have been much easier, it would have been simpler to just kill the Termagant Horde, so probably a slight misplay on the part of our Dark Eldar player, and as soon as we're going to start seeing actions killing off these little Termagant tokens, but I suppose we'll have to see how things resolve. The Clavex Warleader destroys 1 Termagant token, and now the Termagant token is going to attack in return. I suppose that was done by our Dark Eldar player just because he knows he doesn't have any shields left. We see him lose his 3-attack Incubus Warrior, which is just enormously frustrating. Perhaps another small mistake is it would have been better to attack with that prior to the Warleader, just to try to get in as much damage as possible because it was ready. And now we're going to see a Chimera deal 2 damage to the Termagant Horde. There are no shield cards left for our Tyranid player, but of course Regeneration gets to remove 2 points of damage, so just a couple little mistakes there during this crucial battle that could very well cost Chris the game. But let's see how things resolve. We've still got a lot of unexhausted attackers here. Packmaster Kith is going to get to attack. The Swarmlord is just incredibly low on hit points, but I suppose George indicates no actions whatsoever, so at the present moment we're not going to be seeing any more events or actions from our Tyranid player, and clicking over to our Dark Eldar player's hand, we see a Chimera token take a swing. What exactly is he going to be attacking? There are 4 hit points left on the Termagant Horde. It's going to take 2 points of damage, and we've got still some attackers left. This Chimera Masters can bloody the Swarmlord. These Chimera tokens can kill off the Termagant Horde. There's so much nasty stuff. The Termagant Horde we are ultimately going to see destroyed, but it's something like 5 points of damage among 2 different attacks that our Dark Eldar player inadvertently deprived himself of. We've got a Chimera token left. We have Kith's Chimera Masters left. We see the Swarmlord attacked. Once again, no shields whatsoever for our Tyranid player, and that means the Swarmlord is bloodied. He is banished from this battle, and now it's all Kith and 1 token. And we're slowly starting to run out of Tyranids. There's no area effect option, but both players are out of shields. These Chimera tokens are so squishy, and without Solarite Avedis on this planet, this volatile Pyrovore is going to prove to be an absolute nightmare. So let's see, where are the attacks going to go? Chris takes a moment to think. We end up seeing his Chimera token exhaust, and what exactly is he going to attack? He ends up taking a swing at the Brood Warriors. Kind of a curious choice. I suppose if it were me playing this game, personally I would be inclined to try and kill off this volatile Pyrovore, but I suppose he's just trying to eliminate as many individual attacking targets as possible. So we see the Brood Warriors destroyed, we see a Termagant token destroyed, and now all units are going to ready. The Tyranid player is certainly outnumbered by all of these nasty Dark Eldar units, but we see the volatile Pyrovore is going to one-hit kill this Clavex War Leader. It's immediately gone, and it's just going to prove immediately nasty. We see a Chimera token end up killing off a Termagant. A Termagant takes a swing at Packmaster Kith. Packmaster Kith is going to be bloodied and immediately bounced over to her HQ, and now it's going to be our Termagant, and now it's going to be our Dark Eldar player's turn to kill off the remaining Termagant token, and of course the Ripper Swarm is going to take an attack. It's going to destroy one of these Chimera, and now we've got a Chimera still left to attack. I imagine it'll be the Chimera versus the volatile Pyrovore, perhaps, and then the Kith's Chimera Masters to deal the finishing blow. But we do end up seeing the Chimera destroy the Ripper Swarm, and we end up seeing the Chimera Masters destroy that Ripper Swarm as well. So an incredibly close game, incredibly close math, but it looks like our Dark Eldar player is going to just barely scrape through. The initiative token, that volatile Pyrovore, it's going to take a swing, it'll kill a Chimera token, but of course 2 Chimera are going to attack it, and that is going to mean that Chris will end up winning the game, and at the present moment we end up seeing the GG called out, incredibly close. Of course, Kith's Chimera could have ended up killing that volatile Pyrovore, so an extraordinarily well-played game on the part of both players, an extraordinarily close game. I feel like that could have ended extraordinarily early, but our Tyranid managed to come back and just dig and claw and scrape his way out of the dirt, out of the grave, but eventually Packmaster Kith was able to seal the deal and eke out a victory at the very last moment. He'd have had only a single Chimera token in that Kith's Chimera Masters, or any number of different units remaining, but extraordinarily close, so very, very well played by both of our players, but congratulations to Packmaster Kith, Chris, Brain Damage 99 for pulling out the victory. So, as always, thank you once again for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you've not done so already, or if you are already subscribed, be sure to share this content, as the more players that stumble on epic, incredibly close and narrow matches like this, the more players we might ultimately serve to draw into our community, and of course, together send the message to Fantasy Flight Games to keep supporting this game, keep on putting out expansions, and just keep making this incredible product. So if at any point you'd like me to spectate and commentate a game of your own, feel free to get in touch with me on Twitter or through Facebook. And thank you so much for bearing with me through the first game where I've actually been able to see and observe both players' hands. So if at any point you'd like to help me recoup or recover some of my file hosting and operating expenses, I'd be honored were you to visit my Patreon. But in any case, thank you once again for watching, and as always, be sure to check back in again soon for ever more Conquest LCG content to come.